On Wednesday, the mayor of Buffalo, New York, announced a new police reform policy, some of which will be enacted immediately through executive order. Buffalo PD drew nationwide criticism last week after video showed officers shoving a 75-year-old protester to the ground. Two of the officers have been suspended and charged with felony assault. They pleaded not guilty. Following their suspension, Buffalo's entire 57-member emergency response team resigned in a show of solidarity with the officers. Buffalo Mayor Byron Brown joins me now. Mr. Mayor, thanks very much for being with us.
Good to be with you.
So how will your executive order change the way Buffalo is policed?
My executive order and the Buffalo reform agenda that we announced yesterday is just a first step. I look at it as one chapter in a novel that we are writing that will be released over days, weeks, months. This is the first step. The way it will change is to add more transparency. The use of force policies of the Buffalo Police Department will be prominently placed on our website. My executive order calls for an end to arrests for nonviolent offenses. Now we want nonviolent offenses police to provide an appearance ticket so that it limits police stopping and arresting people on the street, searching people on the street. I will set up a commission to have members of the community actually review the policies and procedures of the Buffalo Police Department and to make recommendations on those policies and procedures.
Well, you've also announced what you're calling a new public protection unit to replace the emergency response team when it comes to crowd control. So how will that new team train and operate differently from the emergency response unit, and who will they answer to?
So a little bit of a misinterpretation. The public protection detail will actually work to facilitate peaceful protest in our community. We have a lot of peaceful protests in our community all the time. People protesting against war, protesting for peace. This new unit will work directly with protesters to make sure that peaceful protests can happen in our community and happen safely. We will still have a tactical unit for any mass gatherings that could become problematic and dangerous to the public. But this unit will work on an ongoing basis and receive training to work with peaceful protests and to help facilitate peaceful protests. I also want to say that the 57 members of the emergency response team were actually threatened by the Police Benevolent Association. They did not remove themselves from that unit because they wanted to. They removed themselves under threat. The police union said if they continued to perform the duties of that unit, they would lose the support of the police union, essentially threatening those officers against doing a job that they had signed up to do. It was wrong on the part of the union. The union has been on the wrong side of reform, and now we are calling everybody in our community in to help with reforms, to be a part of reforms, and do the right thing to reform our community as it relates to racial injustice and police misconduct.
So this is the first time hearing of that, Mr. Mayor. So how is it then, when you have that kind of resistance, that you plan to enact sort of significant substantive reform? I know this is an executive order, and you've talked about this being sort of the first of many steps, but that would seem to represent a great deal of resistance when you have 57 officers that you claim were forced to do so, did not want to do so, stepping away from that emergency response team.
Well, Elaine, all of those officers actually came to work the next day, put on their uniforms the next day. And as they were about to go out and work on behalf of the public, they got a bulletin from the union telling them if they performed the duties as members of the emergency response team, the union would withdraw support from them. And once the officers got that bulletin, they resigned from the unit, but not the police department. We have to reform the way police unions work. This police union has been a barrier to reform, but we don't want to look back. We want to look forward. We are calling on the union to work with the members of the community that have worked diligently over the past week to help to develop this reform agenda. This is a first step, and we are calling on all members of our community to be part of our effort to reform our city, our community, as it relates to racial injustice and police misconduct.
So in Minneapolis, Police Chief Arredondo has just withdrawn from negotiations with their police union. Is that something Buffalo should consider?
Buffalo is calling on the police union and all members of our community to work together for needed reform. We have had a reform-minded police department. We've made many reforms over the years, but there's still more work that needs to be done. We're asking the union to be part of that work. Change is underway. The people's call for change is not going to go away. So the union needs to be on board with the work of reforming our police department because the voices of the people are speaking, and those voices are going to continue to be loud for reform.
I know you said, Mayor, that you are looking forward. You don't want to look back, but I do want to ask you about a case in the recent history of Buffalo's police department that is now getting some renewed attention. In 2006, a black police officer, Horne, tried to stop a white officer who had put a black suspect in a chokehold. Now, Officer Horne was later fired, lost her pension after 19 years on the force. We know as well that in Minneapolis, officers failed to intervene as George Floyd asked repeatedly for help. What are you doing to encourage police intervention when a fellow officer may be engaging in misconduct? And is Horne's punishment being reconsidered?
Well, let me say this. First of all, officers in the city of Buffalo do have a duty to intervene. It's part of our use of force policy in the city of Buffalo. All Buffalo police officers do have a duty to intervene, and it was part of our police department receiving state accreditation status. The Horne story is being retold after 14 years. The accounts that you are hearing are not accurate accounts. The other officers that were on that scene with Officer Horne in 2006 dispute that account. That account was the subject of a disciplinary complaint against Officer Horne. Officer Horne had the option of having that complaint heard by the first black commissioner in the history of the Buffalo Police Department, and insisted on an open arbitration hearing. And an arbitrator recommended that Officer Horne be terminated. After that recommendation, she was terminated. She went to court. She lost in court. She went to another process, lost in that process. I requested at the of the community that the New York State Attorney General look into Officer Horne's situation, and the New York State Attorney General thought that there was no reason, based on all of the evidence and information that was provided, to relook at that case. But officers should intervene. In Buffalo, they do have a duty to intervene, and my executive orders recommit our city and our police department to transparency, to making sure officers exercise their duty to intervene, giving them clear policies for how to do that in the field, and limiting contact that could go wrong between our police officers and the public.
All right, I'm afraid we're out of time, but Buffalo Mayor Byron Brown, Mr. Mayor, thanks very much for your time. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me with you.